So, welcome back, everybody. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to talk about from yesterday's practice of resolve? Okay.
I'll say one thing, Karen.
Yes.
So I spoke yesterday about the fact that I'm not sure if I said these words, but that it was a big thing to figure out the direction, a big thing for me personally to figure out the direction. And I felt more confident in the resolve. And I guess during the class, I felt maybe a little bit overwhelmed by that prospect. But later in the day, I actually meditated one more time. And later by the evening, I actually felt upbeat, that I wrote down the prospect of being free to discover what will make my life meaningful is good, right? And like you said to me, what better thing to spend time on? And also I was thinking just the idea that I'm free to choose something different and not repeat old patterns is very uplifting. So I felt pretty good.
Good. And that's how it will hopefully, when we approach this with the right attitude, we'll feel that it's not like pressure to figure out today everything you're going to do with the rest of your life, because that would be not very fun. But instead, to think of this as your adventure, this life that you get to choose, and you don't have to plan it all out, but to give yourself time to let organically sort of an orientation bubble up inside of you, and giving your being the time and space to allow that to happen. I mean, what a wonderful adventure for this lifetime. So it should hopefully feel empowering and joyful and kind of exciting, rather than like pressure and another place to judge ourselves. Like, I don't know what I want to do with the rest of my life. Like, great. Perfect. And knowing, that it doesn't have to be forever, and that and if you're older, you don't have to like not do this too, right? If you have, one more day to live, how, not that any of us probably do, but you never know. How do you want to spend that day? It doesn't have to be, the kind of I'm 25, what am I going to do with my life? This opportunity to make choices continues, and can shift, which is even more fun. That it doesn't have to be one thing. I think when we think about what's my dharma in yogic traditions, it feels like it should be one thing. But I encourage you to allow it to be a process that is open to change whenever you want to, or feel that it's appropriate. Anything else? Okay. So, day 9, for Buddhists and for yogis, love is one of the paths to full liberation. And that brings us to the 9th parami, which is metta, a word you may have heard before. So metta is usually translated as loving kindness. And I will probably revert back to that in talking about it today out of habit. But what I'd like us to use as the translation for metta, for the purpose of the paramis, is the actual translation of the word, which is friendliness. So, how important is friendliness? The Dalai Lama likes to say, my religion is kindness. So, in Buddhist spirituality, how you are is more important than who you are or what you do? I'm going to say that again. How you are is more important than who you are or what you do. I really appreciate this because who we are and what we do has a lot to do with circumstances that aren't necessarily in our control. But we can all take responsibility for some degree for how we are. Through the process of awakening, our personality remains. We don't lose our weird quirks or our temperament that we're born with. And thank goodness, right? Or we'd all become super boring and the same. We're not looking to become flat emotionally or all have the same taste in things. Diversity is what makes the world interesting. And I just point this out because sometimes that's not what people think. Like, if I awaken, I'll stop, I don't know, being me in some way. And my feeling is you get to still be you, just free you. And that way we get to keep all of the diversity. However, we do cultivate our character with practice. Whatever we do repeatedly shapes our character. It's important that we don't just accept the cultural norms for behavior, but instead examine them and decide for ourselves how we want to be. In the context of the parami, the loving attitude that we're looking to cultivate includes forms of love that are characterized by freedom. Therefore, love that includes clinging, lust, confusion, neediness, fear, or grasping to the self would be seen as expressions of bondage and limitation. The Visuddhimagga states that the far enemy of friendliness is ill will. And this means that wishing someone harm is the opposite of friendliness, right? And that's pretty straightforward. The text goes on to state that the near enemy of friendliness is sensual passion. So near enemies are harder to understand. They're the things that parade around as our goal and look like what we're looking for, but are actually opposed to it. So what the text is saying there is that if we objectify somebody, and I'm not saying you can't have sensual passion towards someone and not objectify them, but most of the time it's done as objectification. That might in a sneaky way look like friendliness, but it's actually a problem. So it's the objectification that makes it a problem. And here's sort of an example of this. So it's totally possible to have a romantic relationship based on true friendliness, okay? But the truth is, there's almost always attachment involved. We can, of course, work on this personally, but I'm using this as an example. This is my first teacher's example. I find it pretty telling. So if your partner came home one day and said that he or she has met the love of their life and they're running off together, could you be happy for them? Would you be happy for them? Or would you be, attached for you? So do you want this person's full happiness, or do you want them available to you? And that's the difference. That's the objectification. So if you're not willing to just let them go do whatever, that's clinging. The text continues. The characteristic of friendliness is to promote well-being. Its function is to prefer well-being. Its manifestation is the removal of annoyance, which I like that. Its proximate cause, meaning what causes it to happen, is seeing the loveliness of beings. It succeeds when it makes ill will subside, and it fails when it produces selfish affection. So friendliness manifests as the removal of annoyance, which is totally fabulous. And seeing someone's good qualities is what helps it to arise. And selfish affection isn't it. The Buddha said, just as one would feel friendliness on seeing a dearly beloved friend, so does one extend friendliness to all creatures. I think that's lovely and doable. I thought the dog was coming up. Okay. In contrast, you may have heard this one, which is why I'm bringing it up. The Buddha also said in the Metta Sutta, since we're talking Pali, he said, as a mother would risk her life to protect her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. I mean, I don't know about that one because I think it would be impossible to not be attached to your child, or if not impossible, would take an awful lot of work. And maybe because the Buddha ditched his wife and child to get awakened, he wasn't so family oriented and that worked for him. But I wouldn't set up the mother-child relationship as my non-attachment goal. I think a dear friend works a lot better in my mind. And I found that confusing for a number of years, which is why I'm mentioning it. In any case, these teachings are not just Buddhist. They predated Buddhism in India and are obviously not limited to any tradition. The draw of friendliness is universal, and we all crave connection. So a man went to the Buddha and said, I heard you emanated friendliness. Now meeting you, I see that it's true. The Buddha said in return, it would be accurate if what you said was, I have no anger, no hate, no animosity. Here's the dog. He said, anger, ill will, and animosity have been cut at the root. The causes and conditions for them to arise don't exist anymore. So that's important because that's how it actually works. It's not so much that we're overlaying friendliness over our resentment to try to smother it, which is what I think it sometimes sounds like. So that doesn't work. We've all actually tried that probably before, maybe. It's more like with practice and examination of our own being, we come to see for ourselves that when folks behave badly, it's because they're suffering. And if you're not sure of that yet, that's part of your homework, is to look to see closely, not just today, but ongoing. When someone behaves inappropriately or unwholesomely to harm someone, that they're not in a good place. And once you know that, and know that in the core of your being, that everyone just wants to be happy and they're doing their best, whether what they're doing is skillful or unskillful, it doesn't make sense anymore to hate them. And it just doesn't make sense. It's not like you don't want to do it. It's not the rational response to someone who's suffering. And this brings a certain sensitivity, a kind of tenderness, and understanding. And so friendliness is natural when the anger is no longer there. We're not forcing anything. So that's what the Buddha was describing. That the anger, ill will, and animosity have been cut at the root. And cut at the root means the causes for them are no longer there. And when those causes are no longer there, we don't get the anger, animosity, and ill will, and therefore friendliness is there. So as we're dealing with our anger, though, now that I've said that's the real way to go, is to cut the root, okay? But cutting the root takes time. So in the meantime, we can also practice and strengthen our friendliness. It doesn't need to be left to chance. And so we find a growing freedom from our anger, which, by the way, mostly hurts us, right? Have you noticed that when you're angry, it hurts you way more than the person you're angry at? The person you're angry at may not be in the room. They may not even know you're angry, right? So we find a growing freedom from our anger as it mitigates. and we find compassion to others. When fully developed, friendliness is boundless radiance glowing from us toward all beings. This can be expressed on a daily basis in our usual human interaction, even when we're in lockdown in our homes. We can train to include friendliness in our speech at home, and especially when we find ourselves in conflict, which of course is when it's probably the most interesting and helpful. And we are going to, there will be conflict going forward just because we may be getting rid of our anger and our ill will and our hatred. We're still going to have different opinions and ideas and need to work with other people to implement projects or make decisions. So thinking that we're just going to end up conflict free isn't what to look for, but rather to be going into decision making and relationship with compassion and understanding. So the perfection of friendliness is the wish to provide for the welfare and happiness of the world with both compassion and skillful means. Friendliness disarms anger and so is said to be the greatest protection. So I heard Norman Fisher, great Zen teacher, tell the story. He was driving around a crowded supermarket parking lot in San Francisco, which if you've gone food shopping in San Francisco, you've seen this. So he's looking for a parking spot. He finally finds a spot and pulls in, not having seen a man who was actually waiting for that exact spot. So that man who's got his spot stolen gets out of the car, irate, and threatening Norman, shouting at him. And apparently Norman, with his incredible capacity, looked at the man tenderly and asked if the man was having a bad day. The man broke down, apparently crying, telling Norman of the troubles that he was going through in his life. So that's just one of the many stories I've heard to demonstrate the protective quality of friendliness, because it actually disarms anger. I mean, how can you maybe could be, but it's hard to be angry at someone who has just shown tenderness and compassion to you, right? And I'm not saying that's always the right thing to do in a given circumstance, but it's a great example. You really want to be skillful with your own choices based on your own discrimination of what's going on. So friendliness leads to a sense of ease, security, and fearlessness. Imagine not having to be angry or resentful toward anyone, simply wishing everyone well. So imagine what that would feel like. It's like a weight off our chest, a loving, spacious warmth, and a sense of openness. Friendliness also engenders forgiveness and generosity. We're more likely to be understanding, kind, and giving. Friendliness also creates social harmony, which beautifies the world around us. It's also said that friendliness makes you sleep well. So friendliness is more humble and less dramatic than love. And of course, love is a word used to describe lots of things in our culture. But think of this as, it doesn't have to be like the hugest thing. I mean, it's a big thing. But what I'm trying to say is I'm not a particularly sappy person, but that's not an issue because friendliness isn't sweet or sentimental. It's not necessarily an intensity of affection either. Instead, it's an open-heartedness that's inclusive of all beings all the time, including those who might be harming others. So that can be particularly hard to swallow. But here's a question to consider. Does it help to have hatred of those who harm others? Or does it just eat you up from the inside? Does it lead you to skillful action, or does it just escalate conflict? Will it convince the person to behave differently? I mean, that's the crux of the issue in terms of skillful means. So think back, when someone approaches you all pissed off and asks you to do something differently, do you change your behavior when that's what you're presented with, or do you become defensive? So, trying to understand someone and be kind to someone whose behavior you'd like to change is a much better approach in terms of results and in terms of how you feel and in terms of your ability to stay resolved and energized and committed to actually change a circumstance. Because anger is exhausting, and a loving attitude has a kind of energizing quality, gentle energy from the inside that is maintainable, sustainable. In practice, we can take as a reference point where we feel friendliness the most and expand and develop the feeling out toward everyone. To assist, try to see the good qualities in a person. We don't have to pretend the person is all good, but usually when we have ill will towards someone and look to see in your own experience, we only think of their negative qualities and we forget about all of their positive qualities. And this honestly gets kind of comical when we're angry at, say, an ex-spouse who we once liked enough to marry. If you've done this, you know. We want to relax our minds out of our biases into a more grounded and realistic point of view. So Ajahn Susito writes that friendliness is essential for a happy life. It's non-aversion, but it's also, he writes, non-fascination and non-projection. So we don't need to fixate on or attach to folks. And we don't need to put them on a pedestal and think they're better than other people. And we don't need to see them as wholly negative. Friendliness is more realistic. He says that friendliness releases others from being the objects of our projections, lust, and idealism. With friendliness, we're able to recognize otherness and feel that it's okay. Friendliness also means non-aversion and non-projection toward ourself. Seeing ourselves in a more balanced and realistic view as just a person who wants to be happy, doing our best, even though sometimes we screw up. We don't need to be the most amazing person ever. And we're not the worst person ever to live either. So, and this is just important because I think we're growing up in this culture with this kind of competition where it's sort of better to be better than other people, even though how would that be useful? Instead, we can all do our best and appreciate each other and not try to be better than and not see ourselves as worse than, because that's really self-oriented and judgmental. And instead, if we can let go a bit and be the best us today, not compared to someone else, and enjoy that process, that's going to be a lot more fun and skillful and productive, honestly. So we are worthy of respect and consideration, no more and no less than everyone else. And that's realistic. That's true, provable, I would argue. So this can be tricky in our society where we've been taught that self-love is narcissistic. And many of us have honestly been taught that there's something wrong with us, that we're inherently flawed in some ways and not worthy of love. So to draw a distinction, selfishness is contracted, but self-love is open. And it's easier to feel friendliness toward others if we feel it toward ourselves. And if this is challenging for you, it's definitely worth taking the time to cultivate this attitude for yourself. So I'd like you to observe your own attitude toward yourself as you go about your day today, whether it's in your meditation or in your daily life. What attitudes that you have toward yourself are beneficial? What attitudes that you have toward yourself are undermining and disempowering? And remember, as you look to see, as you go about your day, we don't have to take these attitudes personally. We learned them somewhere, and anything that's learned can be changed. So be gentle with yourself. Meditation peels back our layers, and we discover our deeper conditioning. Then, and only then, we have the opportunity to recondition ourselves. As we wake up, the crust on our heart starts to come off, revealing the heart's natural capacity to feel love and to radiate well-being without needing love back. Gil Fronsdal says the human heart needs to give love much more than it needs to receive. Of course, when we give love, we're more likely to receive it. But even when we don't receive it back, if we can be love, we won't feel lacking in the least. And of course, that's something you can try for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Okay, let's arrange our bodies for meditation. So beginning as always in the body. Grounding the mind in the field of bodily sensations. And to begin cultivating a attitude of friendliness, maybe you start with a friendly attitude toward the body. Instead of just analytically noticing sensations, maybe there's an element of gratitude to this body for allowing you to move through the world and have this human existence. Allowing you to interact with other people and create things. Knowing that your body is always doing its best for you, even if it's sometimes ill or has some kind of disability, discomfort. Appreciating this body. How fortunate are we to find ourselves in this body at this time? And radiating this warm attitude throughout the body, filling the body with appreciation. Noticing the breathing, allowing the breathing to be relaxed, meaning allowing the body to choose the rate of breathing. And cultivating a quality of alertness in the mind, whether that's through energizing the spine or paying more attention. Balancing that increase of energy through paying more attention or lifting the spine by softening the body and by not trying too hard, not striving, not looking for a particular outcome for the practice. So now keeping, let's say, a third of your attention, a quarter of your attention in the body, around the breathing if you like, or just in the body, as a way to ground the mind here. I'd like you to reflect on some of the more significant acts of goodwill that you've received from others. And look to see, how did you feel at the time? And also, how do you feel now thinking about it? And now I'd like you to reflect on some of the more significant acts of goodwill that you've offered to others. And again, how did you feel at the time. And how do you feel now in the remembering? And now let's change gears. I'd like you to consider a challenging person in your life. And look to see what aspect of that person can you consider that would incline you to feel friendlier toward them. And now let's switch gears again. And we'll do a little bit of traditional friendliness practice. So starting with ourselves, I'd like you to say to yourself silently, "May I be well and truly peaceful." May I be well and truly peaceful. And if you want to change the phrase to something that works better for you, you can change the phrase, but I'll stay with the same one for consistency. May I be well and truly peaceful. And as you repeat the phrase, I'd like you to feel that you're in your body, sort of radiating this wish throughout the body. May I be well and truly peaceful. And then we'll start to expand this wish out geographically. So imagine, I don't know, a circle expanding out to maybe include your entire household or the building that you're in. May we be well and truly peaceful. May we be well and truly peaceful. You could expand out to the entire town that you're in. May we be well and truly peaceful. Could expand out to the county. The entire state. May we be well and truly peaceful. Reaching this wish out to the entire country. May we be well and truly peaceful. Expanding out to the entire continent. May we be well and truly peaceful. And now reaching the mind out to the entire world. May we be well and truly peaceful. Radiating wishes from your body out into the world, touching all beings, including animals, including insects. If you want to go beyond the planet into the universe, beings and other, planets, whatever you can imagine. And I'd like you to look to see, how does this make your mind feel, your being feel, this attitude of friendliness? And now releasing all technique, taking a moment to just feel the body. And we'll slowly open our eyes. Moving as you like, of course. So James Baldwin writes, "Love takes off the masks that we fear we cannot live without and know we cannot live within." He says, I use the word love here not merely in the personal sense, but as a state of being or a state of grace, not in the infantile American sense of being made happy, but in the tough and universal sense of quest and daring and growth. So this shows friendliness as a parami. We can use our openness of heart as a way to approach the world and orient our lives. Jack Kornfield says, you are loving awareness. And then you're given this gift of life. And what seeds will you plant? To begin to meditate is really a coming home, he says, to remember, who am I really? What do I want to make of this life? First, can I find a spaciousness of heart and mind that can tolerate human incarnation? You can. Sit like a Buddha. And then it's said in Zen that there are only two things. You sit and you sweep the garden. And it doesn't matter how big the garden is. You quiet the mind. You open the heart. You remember that you are loving awareness, that you have this gift of life. And then you get up with the rake and the broom and you go out into the garden of the world and you garden. You plant beautiful seeds. So your practice for today in your meditation or your daily life is to cultivate a friendly attitude toward yourself and others and the world around you. See where you have difficulty and see where it's easy. And consider how this attitude informs your resolve from yesterday. Okay, I'm going to open this up. Any thoughts, comments, questions? Hold on. I did not successfully unmute. Okay.
So far of all of these, this one feels the most natural for me. It's like just something that's in me. Where I get stuck, and I guess I wonder what your suggestion would be, is one thing I'm working on is, why I people please so much. Mm-hmm. So like compassion and kindness or friendliness versus people pleasing. And then tie that into, I guess I know the difference there. This is really the part where there's someone in your life that you can't just say goodbye to because maybe they're a family member. Maybe. At what point is there on maybe a mental health issue, or they're not looking at this like we are, and so their attitude just continues to be hurtful and harmful. So at what point do you say, when is the boundary set, and what does the boundary look like, or how do you do that? Or is that like a long discussion?
First of all, every circumstance is different. Yeah. So there's no right way to set a boundary or right time to set a boundary. That's really got to be your call, discrimination.
Yeah.
So from today's teaching, the trick would be to try to see their good qualities. Mm-hmm. And to try to have compassion, to know that when they're behaving unskillfully, that it's because of their suffering. And to see that, and that might help you to be more skillful with them in the moment, because you can sort of see their side, or sort of feel how they're feeling. Like, think about their posture, put yourself in their posture, imagine what it feels like to be them in the moment. And that might help you to calm them down. Because you might say something more helpful than if you're just annoyed with them and speaking from annoyance. Mm-hmm. Another part of the teaching is what we're going to talk about tomorrow, which is equanimity, which is acknowledging that we can't control people and we can't make them happy. Mm-hmm. And that really some people are going to be unskillful with their lives, and that's out of our control. That's not the side of equanimity that we're going to talk about specifically tomorrow, but, cultivating this kind of emotional balance that realizes there's a lot going on in the world. And it's not ours to fix everything. It's not possible, which doesn't mean we don't try our best to be skillful. It just means that we're not looking for the result of ultimate control over everybody in every situation, because even if that's not conscious, sometimes unconsciously that's what we're doing. And that just is frustrating. Mm-hmm. Is that helpful?
Yes, it is. It is.
That's good to see your body's moving. That helps.
Dealing with challenging people is really where this practice kind of comes to fruition, right? I mean, we can cultivate being friendly all day, and that I highly recommend. It's amazing. And then being friendly in situations that are challenging, that's sort of the ultimate fruition. And I think, if you get in one of these circumstances and you find yourself from your practice being able to be compassionate and understanding to someone who's causing harm, and maybe you tweak your behavior and try something new, and then the situation goes differently, and then you gain confidence that it's worth trying without getting frustrated that you didn't fix the situation, because you are one person and there's a lot of moving parts in the world, and it's not our job to make the whole world go exactly as we want all the time. But it is our job to do our best to sort of beautify the world we live in, through, right, for ourselves and for other people. And by, maybe it's just being patient. or maybe it's saying some clever thing that turns someone around. I mean, who knows? But think of it as a sort of adventure, to try different things rather than pressure to sort of fix the most challenging relationship you have in the next week.
Yeah, that makes
That
sense.
really helps me.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.